Feature Bootcamp, new session, same old stuff. We are going through 8 weeks to write a complete feature from beginning to end. That means you don't have to have any experience, but the more other boot camps you've been through, the more sort of leg up you will get at the start, and you will have a little bit of an advantage going through this already knowing some of the basics and having some of that structure worked out. So I recommend we have plenty of other sessions recorded. If you're curious about those first couple steps or what those first couple classes will entail, then you can check out plenty of other recordings of Script Camp classes on our YouTube channel. And if you're watching on one of our many different channels such as Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, or Kick, then you can come join us on Discord by going to scriptcamp.net, and there you can sign up for unlimited membership. You get access to every class and every course, every workshop on every channel. This one is an 8-week course, and the first 2 weeks are usually going to be free and open to everybody to see if they want to try out Script Camp. This is our longest running program. The Feature Bootcamp was our very first class. Who knows, it may be our very last class. It might be the first and last thing we ever do. I don't mean today, but I mean in general, if there's just one core class on Script Camp, it is this one, Feature Bootcamp. Although there's plenty of others. As you can see, we have many other servers, including WordCamp, where we teach novel writing classes every Saturday, like tomorrow from 12 to 2. We also have Code Camp, dedicated towards coding, Toon Camp for animation, Game Camp for gaming, which is a brand new one that we're just starting to expand now, and starting a brand new game design course Wednesdays at 6 p.m. So if you're interested in making video games or games of any kind, board games, table card, or trading card games, or other stuff like that, then check out Game Camp and sign up for my Unreal Learning Group, which is going to be meeting on Wednesdays. And from start to finish, you don't have to have any experience. Going to be learning to use Unreal Engine to make full games. Not awesome games right away, but games. Hopefully they will become awesome over time. This is all the Skill Camp servers. You can get access to all of these at scriptcamp.net, and pretty soon we will have a Skill Camp website, so you'll be able to sign up through that as well. I'm Connor. Everyone I think here knows me already. I've been in LA as a rep screenwriter since 2017. I can't actually announce anything about it yet, but in the action space, I recently set up a movie that I want to announce to you all soon. I cannot do so yet, but I will just say thank you. I'm working in this sort of horror thriller and action world in Hollywood and London. We will have, as soon as we can say more, we will. In any case, there's, I teach plenty of classes a week, 3 bootcamp classes on the weekends. That would be feature, TV, and novels. On Fridays, 6 to 8, Saturdays, 12 to 2, and Sundays, 11 to 1, with all times being in Pacific Standard Time. You can enroll at scriptcamp.net/classes to just get a single class, or you can sign up for that unlimited membership, which we mentioned before, which would get you unlimited access to every class on every server. So we highly recommend trying that out. All right, here we are. So here's the overview of this upcoming class. There's plenty of weeks coming up, and you can see that right now we're on week 0, which is going to be the overview, looking ahead at the key essential elements of action movies and starting to get that early feedback to start to shape your idea into something that works a little better, perhaps. This is going to be action themed. If you don't have an action story, that's okay. Hopefully at least one person in the group does, I guess I would say. We are going to be working this week on refining premise and figuring out what are the sort of bare essentials that we need to come up with a compelling action story, and what kind of stuff are we looking for in the professional kind of action world. What are producers looking for? We also have a great, I call it great, like I didn't make it. I call it great. A class that was from a couple weeks ago on stories that are selling in 2024, where we talk about this idea of the contained action film. So you might want to check that one out on our YouTube channel, which also talks a lot about contained horror and thriller, if you're looking to specifically design something that could be made or sold in 2024, the year of our Lord. All right, so we have plenty of weeks coming up, though. Next week is going to be finalizing your logline, so you can get that early feedback on your logline today if you want. If you have that just early version or concept of what your story would be, this is where you can get some of those just essential questions worked out. Make sure that this does qualify as an action movie, and you're designing all the various elements to amplify that as best you can. So this week is all about just brainstorming, starting to make initial notes in your sketchbook, and trying to settle on a logline or an idea if you have several ideas that you're trying to juggle between and decide. We also have next week, which is going to be finalizing loglines and filling out the rest of the sketchbook, and we go from logline to outline. So we'll look at some tips from just a really strong logline, which is that one-sentence expression of your central plot idea, and how to use a well-written one to figure out where several moments in your story are going to fall on your structure sheet right off the bat. We have been doing one-sheets and synopses recently. So in week 2, we will take a look at writing a one-page synopsis of the story. And we're going to be breaking the story beats in week 2 as well. So week 2, we're going to figure out what are those major moments of the narrative and what does a summary of all those events essentially look like. From there, we're going to expand into scene cards, which is going to be a full paragraph attached to each scene, so we know what happens in each scene, and basically a really comprehensive map and plan for what happens in every page of the story, all before we're even starting to write those pages, so you don't need to download that screenwriting software until halfway through on September 6th. That's when we're going to actually start writing those pages, and we recommend at that point downloading something like Arc Studio or Writer Duet to get formatting. And from there, you're going to be writing about 20 to 25 pages a week for 4 weeks, with the final the first draft. The first draft completed by early October. Okay, so it's about a 2-month course. You'll write a whole movie. We will work through the first half, which is planning and plotting, and the second half is all executing and writing. Okay, let's keep going. So, we are doing action focus in this camp. That means that in determining some of the basics, we are going to be looking at the rules and expectations of action films, so we know what it is that you're trying to make and what is the basic appeal of these things. Action can mean a lot of different stuff. It doesn't always mean movies about good guys shooting at the bad guys and the bad guys shooting at the good guys. There's lots of other options within that, but basically this does come down to the idea of entertaining moments of physical violence and stunts. This is what the whole genre kind of revolves around, this idea of interpersonal violence between intelligent entities. That's what sort of distinguishes something like action from something a little bit more like adventure. Although adventure does have action elements in a lot of these movies, you can also have an adventure story that's nothing but a guy trying to climb a mountain, right? It's not action unless we have the team of bad guys also trying to climb the mountain, and the bad guys, are trying to stop the good guys, or there can only be one winner, or something like this, right? So we do require opponents for an action film. A story that is entirely about a character dealing with things in their own mind and in their own internal experience is most likely a drama or an introspective short story or something like this, slice of life perhaps. We need physical danger, moments of exaggerated and high stakes action, and intelligent opponents in order for this to be action. They don't have to be sapient opponents. You could technically have an action film where we're fighting animals, aliens, or robots or something like that. But they need to be able to, act with some degree of agency. So, what are some essentials? We'll look today at the overview. What's an action movie? Subgenres and plot archetypes, budget levels, action premises, and sort of a checklist of stuff that we're looking for. Action as a method and tool of revealing character. Set pieces. We probably won't get too into A defeats B defeats C today. I think that I might actually reserve that for next week or the following week, because that's a little bit more of a scene writing technique rather than a planning and plotting technique. And I'd rather, in the opening overview classes, kind of get a sense of what are you guys working on, what are the premises you have in mind, and how can we refine and sharpen those so that they're the best approach that they can be. We want to make sure we have a strong foundation and that you're building a really, really, solid concrete pad underneath your building so that when you're halfway up, you don't realize that something is not in place and it all collapses down. Having that strongest idea allows us to build from the ground up. So we work from the logline. The logline being the one-sentence expression of the idea. We assess if there's any issues with the very basics. From there, we layer on the next, concrete and bricks and everything like that, which is going to be your story beats, where you're going to figure out the essentials of the plot. The scene cards are how you're going to expand from story beats and get even more granular, so we're sort of planning each room of the house. And then finally, at the halfway through the course mark, you're going to actually start writing and formatting those scenes, writing dialogue, things like that. So we may not cover everything on this list today, but we will make lots of time for loglines and student premises. So in the second half of the class, in about 30 to 45 minutes, we will ask, what are you working on? What are your ideas? What do you want to share? Maybe you want to brainstorm. Maybe you have a couple different ideas that you're working on. Or perhaps you actually have an early version of a logline already. Or you're working on it right now, like the kid who always did the homework on the bus on the way to school. I say like that wasn't me doing the homework in my parents' car on the way to school. But even if so, you can share something today and get those initial pointers and a nudge in the right direction to make sure that the essentials are working. If you've never written a logline before, it's okay. You don't have to come out with a perfect, amazing one right away. And this is a very iterative process that sometimes we pour the concrete foundation and we have to rip it back up and pour it again, or reconfigure it, or try a different recipe, or whatever, however we want to belabor that metaphor. So don't expect to hear, it's perfect, great job, go ahead right away. This is very tough to come up with a great premise. If it was easy, everybody could do it. All right, so let's start with some of the basics. I want to get through the action movie essential stuff pretty quick so we can work towards those student loglines, and I want everyone to be, ideally have your sketchbook open and be writing out that early version of the logline if you know how to do that. If you don't know how to do that and don't know what that is, don't worry too much. I have plenty of other programs on that you can check out, both recordings and also just like every intro course basically covers loglines. So there's plenty of them happening all the time. You can just share the basic brainstorm of the idea, the setting, the hero, whatever you've got for your movie premise. And if it's not action, don't worry, we're not mad at you. But I hope at least one person has an action movie. Okay, let's get through some of the essentials and figure out, and I would be, of course, having your sketchbook open, taking notes if you're unclear about these things. If you're new to action, you don't really watch a lot of these movies or something like this, obviously, your first goal is to go watch a bunch of them. So I think I saw actually earlier in the chat, Mario started us off with favorite action movie. Why don't we just, in the chat, just let us know, what are some of your favorite action movies that you guys just think are awesome? Let us know now, and I'll check the chat in just a moment. For me, I have a couple posters in here that sort of are hinting at my general area of interest. But we can see I really like a lot of foreign action movies. This is District B13, a very underrated French kind of parkour, martial arts, shoot 'em up action kind of movie from, I think, I'm going to say maybe 2008. This was remade as Brick Mansion, starring Paul Walker in the US way later and was not as good. There's also a sequel, District B13 Ultimatum, also underrated. I have Ong Bak on here as well, which is kind of also in that lovely school of mid-2000s parkour-ish Muay Thai style action. There were two Ong Bak sequels, which were actually prequels, but the first one, Ong Bak Thai Warrior, from 2005, total banger. And if you can find other Tony Jaa movies like The Protector, also just like, amazing, friggin' amazing. You gotta check these out if you're into martial arts especially. The ones that I would recommend that are off the beaten path are also going to be there's a Thai action martial arts movie from about 2004 called Born to Fight, which is the only movie that I've watched and been legitimately worried for the actors the entire time. Because you'll see stunts that like, oh, that guy just almost actually died. There are very different safety standards for stunts in other different countries or different markets around the world. Which is not to say that we're celebrating that, but just watching, you know you're going to get good. It's kind of like when you go into the restaurant that's off the beaten path, and the menu doesn't have any English on it, and you're just like, gosh, I can't read this at all. And you're like, oh, that's the authentic stuff. That's kind of like the straight-to-DVD Thai action movies to me growing up in high school were sort of that. In terms of the big American stuff, there's also lots of great things. Of course, The Matrix, one of the best movies of all time. We've got your Star Wars. We've got your Marvel. There are so many movies that kind of fall underneath that action umbrella. In terms of James Bond, I've seen every one like 100 times, but Skyfall, I mean, it's just probably the best one. It takes James Bond the most seriously as a really vulnerable human character, but also a total badass cool guy. I mean, I really like a lot of Jason Statham movies, which are just such a blast, even the cheesiest ones. I'm not really a Fast and Furious guy myself, as that franchise seems to kind of just like be obsessed with topping itself to the extent that they're basically, they've been superheroes since about the fourth movie. And it doesn't feel like it takes place in anything resembling a consistent real world at all. What have you guys got? Let's check the chat. I see Temple of Doom. Awesome. Aliens. Yes, Aliens being one of those really, really hallmark action horror movies, which there's not actually a lot of this, considering those are kind of clashing tones. The idea that action requires hyper-competent characters, and horror requires your characters to be very vulnerable. So action horror requires it to be both. Your characters are competent, but the forces they face are terrifying and overwhelming, which is a tricky balance to strike exactly right. We have Fury Road. That's the Holy Trinity according to Stefan. I love it. We've got, let's check it out, Raiders and Crusaders. Yep, so we've got all kinds of Indiana Jones action and adventure and comedy and romance. They've got just everything in them. Seven Samurai, absolutely Vader. Yeah, that's an action movie, yeah. Unequivocally, absolutely. A lot of Kurosawa movies are action movies, and crime dramas too, and then he's got crime action type movies too. Beverly Hills Cop, that's a fun one. Beverly Hills Ninja is kind of a fun one as well. That's a comedy, silly, goofy, kind of like that era of what we might call ninja mania in the mid-90s, kind of spawned a lot of sort of like action martial arts type comedies, and also things like Ninja Turtles, which are big to this very day, Mortal Kombat. The kung fu craze of the 70s to the 90s always results in a lot of just fun stuff. Three Ninjas, yep, High Noon on Mega Mountain. Remember with Hulk Hogan as one of the lead cast, or I guess he's sort of more like a mentor protector figure for them. There is a lot of great action from the 80s and 90s, which I think is kind of seen as this heyday of action because of the emergence of the blockbuster era. The sort of Spielbergs and Ridley Scotts of the world created this idea that action movies are just mass popcorn entertainment, and they can be for the whole family. Mario mentions Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Go Back into Time. Oh yeah, that I believe is the second or third movie, Turtles in Time, I think it's called. The Rock, Broken Arrow, Long Kiss Goodnight. Yeah, we got some Shane Black in there with Long Kiss Goodnight. Love to see it. We have a little picture of him right there, don't we? Shane Black, pretty much the master of the mystery slash action, like cop kind of movies like Lethal Weapon. We've got RoboCop, of course, from the 80s as well, which is the Paul Verhoeven sort of style of way over-the-top action movie that has an element of satire woven into it, which we see in Starship Troopers as well. We have a question, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang is mystery. Kiss Kiss Bang Bang is a neo-noir mystery with action sequences. Django Unchained, yep, Tarantino has some action movies as well. Kill Bill, those movies are just... Almost every scene is like a direct reference to another movie or subgenre of other movies. We have a question, did Shane Black write Predator? He has a credit on it, and he's in the movie, yeah. Glad to see all these different movies from all throughout the years. Many different cultures and countries. We'd love to see it. We love the diversity. We love the varied heroes and villains and goals, which is a big part of sort of what makes this genre so fun, is that we're looking for, specifically, like with any genre, stuff that's it's like what we've seen before, in the sense that we know the type of thrills we're going to get, but we don't know exactly what package that's going to come in. We don't know who the hero is going to be or what their journey is going to be like. We are looking specifically for a protagonist that is thrust against obstacles that require person-on-person violence and frantic physical feats. We are looking for resourceful heroes that struggle against incredible odds with overwhelmingly formidable opponents, deadly high-stakes situations that usually are going to result in that violence that we mentioned, though the hero does not always have to be the one dealing out the violence. We can look at action and chase movies too. Your hero could just be running away the whole time, but we have to have that threat of violence. Think of Terminator, for instance, which is an action sci-fi with a horror-ish sensibility to it, almost a slasher type, relentless opponent that's at the heart of it. So your hero does not need to be killing people for it to be an action movie at all. And in lots of superhero stories, that sort of becomes a big part of the point, which is your hero willing to be as bad as the bad guys to stop them from doing their dastardly deeds? Some of them are, some of them aren't. Some of them accidentally start drifting down that path. Remember in Spider-Man when he trips that guy, knocks him out the window, and kills Uncle Ben's killer, but sort of after that decides, wait, I'm not going to do that anymore, basically. So this question of killing that is not inherent to action necessarily. Your hero doesn't have to be a killer, but the threat of violence and death does sort of need to be propelling the story forward and keeping that urgency as high as we can. I'm seeing a comment in the chat. I'm talking too fast. Sorry about that. That's always the note I got from the theater teacher. So let me slow the pace down a little bit so nobody accuses me of being on cocaine. So let's look at some basic subgenres. We have your action thriller. Action thriller is, there's a lot of like what we might call nitpicking and fine-tooth hair combing you can do with all these. Not everybody agrees on what exactly an action thriller is. However, I look at this as higher and more personal stakes, but a smaller scope. More emphasis on suspense and ticking clocks and pushing our heroes to that absolute edge, with something like Die Hard being sort of this quintessential example of what is the action thriller, right? It's not about factions fighting each other. It's sort of about one hero, personal stakes, and that one character being pushed to the very edge of their competence. So they are running low on ammo, leads, running low on time, and sometimes action thriller can have that element of mystery as well. We don't know where the next bomb is going to be. The Dark Knight has that sense of action thriller to it by far. But not every superhero movie does. Whoops, I flipped the wrong camera. We have your sci-fi, fantasy, or horror, which can be historical adventure or might be sci-fi fantasy if set in modern day. We have sports. Somebody in the chat just mentioned this. Talking Cheeto says, sports movies are highly underrated. Personally, I don't like them, and I don't really lump them in with action movies, but some people do consider them within this same world. I'm not really going to talk about them as much. Racing movies, I think, would have the closest level of, or the closest type of action to action movies. Action comedy is really common. This is more just like a tonal distinction, and it's a mode in which we tell these stories or conceive the plots, it doesn't really affect the construction of those plots themselves. When it comes to sci-fi, fantasy, or horror, I mentioned that difficulty of horror in the sense of your characters need to be both competent and overmatched. So highly competent characters with an even more terrifying or overwhelming opponent. Think along the lines of Underworld. Blade has elements of this, but Blade is usually not really afraid of what he's going up against, and the enemies that he's... usually horror requires the characters to be afraid. So more often than not, movies that some people classify as action horror are going to be more like, this is an action movie but in a horror setting, or in a place, it's an action movie with scary opponents. So it's kind of hard to exactly balance that. So I'd actually be careful with that one. Sci-fi and fantasy usually are going to boil down to your heroes are fighting a supernatural or sci-fi based threat, or they are using a sci-fi or supernatural based method to fight that threat, or both. It could also be both. Think of Men in Black, right? What are we fighting? Aliens. What are we using? Alien technology and human technology. Sci-fi threat, sci-fi method of fighting them, you can have both. Or it could just be one or the other. We have your stories where we're facing a sci-fi or fantasy opponent, like, demon or giant animal, Godzilla, but we only have access to regular modern day technology and nothing supernatural in our own kind of arsenal. That also works too. So what are we really looking for? What do we want? Interesting, formidable opponents. We like opponents that are clever and smart and motivated and aren't just acting randomly or for no reason or just because they're evil. We like a multi-layered opponent that feels like they're doing what they do for a good reason, that we can almost understand where they're coming from. All these things are pretty important towards having a villain that feels fleshed out. If you don't have a fleshed out villain, you don't always need one, but think of different tiers of villains and how much we flesh them out. Lord of the Rings, action-adventure franchise. Who's the main villain? Is it Sauron? Pretty much yes. Does Sauron have an interesting set of motivations and personality? Not within that trilogy. In the Silmarillion and Rings of Power and things like this, more so. But within the trilogy, he's a giant eyeball that lives on a tower. Do we flesh out or characterize Sauron? No. Do we need to? No. Look at all the other opponents and villains we have in Lord of the Rings. Who have we got? Saruman. Wow, what an interesting character. The formerly white wizard, white denoting that this wizard is sort of intended to be allied against the Shadow, turning his back on his former allies, like Gandalf the Grey, for instance, and becoming one with the, joining Sauron, joining the enemy because he feels, well, the enemy's going to win. Saruman's kind of right. The enemy is, clearly overwhelmingly strong, and if we don't join him, we're going to be destroyed by him. Obviously, that isn't how it shakes out, but his point of view makes sense. It's interesting. He's got something baked into his backstory. He's got an interesting central relationship. What other villains do we have in Lord of the Rings? On a movie-by-movie basis, we have these sort of lieutenants that are kind of elevated from the forces of the enemy into feeling like they are going to be the kind of mini-boss for that sequence or for that movie itself. In the first one, we have Lurtz, the orc commander with the white hand on the face. And also we have other mini-bosses all throughout, like the Watcher in the Water, the Cave Troll from the Mines of Moria, etc., etc. In the other movies, we have other characters that are kind of elevated to the position of temporary mini-boss of higher level of threat and formidability that they're proposing to us. Nerd Geek mentions Gollum. Yeah, Gollum's another type of enemy or opponent in the story, but a completely different kind. We have enemies that are of different levels of power and competence. We have enemies that are of different levels of likability. We have enemies that are of different levels of power or specific things they can do. We have enemies that are at different levels of proactivity and that they sort of mean to be galvanized to action, for instance. So yeah, remember, Saruman does not start the story as evil. So lots of interesting things you can do with your villains that even if you don't have the central, even if the guy behind all of this, the Emperor from Star Wars, may not be fully fleshed out. Well, Darth Vader sure is over the course of 6 movies, right? You can have other opponents that kind of represent different facets of that enemy force. Especially if we're dealing with military type stories, not everyone on that side is a monolith, particularly if you're telling true or inspired by true, realistic action stories that are based on conflicts and wars and things like this. It sort of becomes more of your responsibility to characterize the enemy and make it feel like they aren't all just a bunch of screaming evil savages or whatever it is, right? Because that's just not what real war is like. What else we got? Unique tactics or limitations for the hero and their team. This means that often it's going to come down to an interesting way of fighting the enemy because fighting or combating or escaping the enemy are a lot of what your heroes are going to be doing in this sort of story. We also like limitations. If your character is forced to work around some kind of limitation, for instance, take a look at any of the many kung fu movies that are about, the blind master, the one-legged master, or what's that awesome one where there's one guy that has no arms, and he's partners with another kung fu master that has no legs, and they team up by a sort of like locking together in like a backpack style, like remember when Yoda rides around on Luke's back, kind of like that, and then they're able to fight. They sort of combine their forces. If somebody can find what that one's called, it might be called Crippled Masters, although I'm not sure if that's a very PC title nowadays, but if you can find that, I do want to know what that's called. But that's just an example of limitations can be just as fun as tactics themselves, right? What your characters can't do will provide you just as many games as what they can, and sort of force them to work in different ways to achieve their goals. That can go for villains too, but usually if your villains have limitations, they shouldn't be such that they make them less powerful than your hero. The opponent pretty much needs to be at least equal footing with your hero, or they can be significantly more powerful too. What else we got? Compelling dynamics within the hero's team, both internal and external. Now what that could mean is internally your hero is struggling with their own self-doubt or choices of morality, or what is Batman always worried about, like, should I become as bad as the Joker to take down the Joker? And the answer that he comes to is no, he never does, but he's got that constant struggle within him, that little storm in the bottle that is constantly testing him and forcing him to dig down deep and reaffirm who he is, or sort of rediscover why it is what he's doing. Why is he doing what he's doing again and again over the course of all the many 100,000 Batman movies. That's an internal dynamic, but we have external dynamics too. Think of all your superhero team-up movies, your Suicide Squads and your X-Men's and all these things like this. We like a diverse set of relationships within the team. Some of them are romantically involved. Sometimes there's love triangles, like in the original X-Men trilogy between Jean and Logan and Scott. And we have different types of relationships within these archetypes. Like we have mentors, we have rivals. We mentioned the lover. You've got the characters that like each other. You've got the characters that hate each other. You have the characters that are impressed by each other. The characters that are afraid of each other. Things like this, and the way that they change and shift and affect each other over time, become really compelling elements of team-based stories, especially in the war space. Because if you're writing war movies that are kind of realistic, we don't usually cut back and forth between our team and the enemy team in war stories. There are some that do that. Not that many, though. And more often than not, it's going to be about the inter-team dynamics of your Saving Private Ryan squad and things like this that are going to provide a lot of the meat of the sort of action drama style plot archetype. So keep those team dynamics in mind. What's interesting about the team, not just who the hero and who they are, but how they bounce off of everybody else. Varied objectives that move us forward, that keep us moving forward, and doing new and different things. Unless your whole movie is sort of a defense-style setup, something like The Last Stand, or Seven Samurai is a defense-style plot too, right? But that's not all we're doing in the entire movie. We like to split up larger or more repetitive goals into more interesting sequences of action. So if, for instance, we have to defend a castle, there could be a lot of other set pieces that lead up to us defending the castle, right? Well, first we need stone to build a better wall. Well, how do we go get the stone? That could be like a little expedition or a little mission or something like that along the way. You can think of it, it's very similar to video game. Maybe I'm just in the world of game design right now because that's been my main interest lately. But it's also, a lot of games are action-adventure genre as well, right? So we can think of these sort of mini-bosses and your characters sort of like overcoming those on their way towards beating the bigger boss in a similar way to how we think of game objectives. Your Zelda is going to be sort of similar to Lord of the Rings because they're linked to that same style of action-adventure fantasy storytelling. So we're moving forward, we're facing different opponents or many sub-bosses along the way. As we work our way up towards finally facing that final boss, we got to get the boss key to unlock the door to Queen Goma or whatever it is. And then last, we are often interested by a cool setting or all the different dangers and challenges and hazards that one setting will present that we haven't necessarily seen before. And that can be a big part of the hook of the movie and the different games that we can play in your set pieces. Especially if your character makes good use of the environment, if you're writing a Jackie Chan style story, or you're writing I mentioned Jason Statham, he's always beating people up with whatever is in the room. Then varying the environment, providing interesting dangers, hazards, or things that can help the hero, those can always be really, really fun. Or maybe you've built a story world in which it's not so much about the set pieces, but about the rules that lead to this world in the first place, such as The Matrix, or what was that one, is it called, about, In Time, the one where it's a world where you have time as like a currency. How long until you die is like written on an LED display on your arm, but what happens when your time runs out? I actually forget the exact plot. I think Justin Timberlake needs to go on the run from the dystopian cops. Anyway, or what's another one? Minority Report. Mystery movie with a lot of action sequences, wherein we are in a world where only in this world is this sort of action possible, right? We have psychics that are able to play into the action scenes, especially when Tom Cruise's character teams up with the psychic character. We sort of unlock new abilities or new games that we can play within the same world, just based on the rules as that setting provided to us. So setting can be a great part of the hook of action stories. Just think of where is this action taking place, and that can be a great place to start as well. I see a question in the chat, maybe tagging me, saying which games. Maybe, I'm not sure if that's tagging me or tagging somebody else. But the games I was talking about was Zelda. So Zelda being a similar sort of action. It's like a mashup of all of the various different Western sword and sorcery. It's kind of like a grab bag of, you have your Lord of the Rings, you have some Japanese folklore thrown in there, you have a little bit of Conan here and there, you've got all kinds of stuff. So I think that that one maps to this style of storytelling well. Also with the sort of puzzle elements, they are interspersing the action. So we have a couple different sort of types of things your character can do. We have platforming, we have puzzling, we have fighting. You can think of your action movie characters as having similar sorts of abilities or objectives, or we like to watch them do similar sorts of stuff, which is why I keep coming back to this idea of video games. Our last thing we're looking for are going to be stunts, visual effects, and just awesome blockbuster moments. Things that would fit in the trailer and really sell what is the central idea of this and what's so fun about it in just an image or in just a moment. Think of that bullet time sequence that I'm sure they showed in the trailers for The Matrix, at least some of them. I know there were some mysterious trailers for that movie too that didn't show anything. But let's think of, I don't know, trailers for The Matrix Reloaded, for instance. That one's going to show off all the cool, different stuff that's only possible in this world. Bullet time, jumping off of walls, you have ghost people, you have katana fights on moving cars, you have fights against huge hordes of sort of clone-like NPC enemies. You've got so many different sort of fun types of things that could only happen here. And then we're also looking for urgency in the time frame, in high stakes and high intensity, meaning that your characters have to act now, they have to act fast, and they have to accomplish their goals before the bad guys accomplish theirs. Okay, so that's a lot of just the basics of action stories. If you're not writing it, it's okay, but if you are, let's just try to make sure that you've got at least, a solid number of these down. You understand what the audience wants, and obviously you're a fan, so you should know what you want to see out of these. And I want to open to questions on just the very basics of action movie storytelling. Any questions before we proceed? Feel free to use the text or unmute and ask out loud. Any questions? So we will continue. So let's look at some subgenres. We mentioned the sci-fi fantasy horror thing and the various challenges and difficulties of that and what that kind of looks like. We've got your Blade, your Aliens, Godzilla, Terminator, anything with speculative elements, meaning stuff that is not possible in our current world as we understand it, are going to fall into that sci-fi fantasy horror kind of world. Everything Everywhere All at Once is a recent sci-fi wuxia style action movie that was obviously one of the most popular movies in the entire world. We have your intrigue, which is going to be your politics, your war, and espionage, and that's essentially going to be international stakes. Everything from Kingsman to Black Hawk Down to Lone Survivor, your military action movies, your spies, your Mission Impossibles, your James Bonds. We have crime, which is going to feature heists, gangs, street races, everything. Usually this is not going to touch on international stakes unless you amp up the intensity to the level of Fast and Furious, which after a certain point, they're going to space and stuff. It doesn't really feel like a crime. They're not even doing crime anymore. But crime is going to feature your robbers, your racers, shootouts with gangs and criminals, Die Hard, Fast and Furious, Heat. And then our last major category is going to be adventure and historical. Zorro, pirates, westerns, knights, kung fu, Crouching Tiger, Braveheart. Somebody mentioned Seven Samurai, so yeah, samurai definitely. And this is sort of a subspace of action that's going to feature. Almost always these are going to be historical in setting, unless you have some sort of fantasy element too. Just because there's not a lot of real reasons, or not a lot of reasons in the modern day for people to be doing kung fu on each other in a serious way. Unless, for instance, somebody is a time traveler or has superpowers or something like that. You're, what is it called, Shang-Chi or something like this. We have a question I see in the chat. Do these subs mix? Yeah, there's combinations of these things. Sometimes we do see something like Inception, for instance, is a sci-fi / also spy type story, and it's got a little crime-ish element too, to an extent. So yeah, these are not hard and fast rules. These are just going to be like the overall flavor of these different stories. That can be a good starting point as well to think of. Okay, what would a horror historical adventure be like? Or what would a crime intrigue movie be like? Are we mixing criminals and spies together? Could be cool. I think we see a bit of that in something like Sicario, where we have criminals that are acting at such a high level that they're essentially, agents of not quite the state, but something close to the state, the narco state. They almost operate like spies do. We have a question, what's Agent Cody Banks? Cody Banks is intrigue, and that's in the sort of spy-fi world. And intrigue in the spy-fi world often includes some sci-fi stuff too, in that we're assuming that the characters have access to advanced technology that's not yet on the market, but might be sort of in the works, like something that might eventually be possible, but is at the very cutting edge. Question, have I seen the original Sicario movie? I've seen the Taylor Sheridan movie called Sicario. If there's another original besides that, then I have not seen something besides it. But yes, I have seen Sicario with Emily Blunt. Let's look at some plot archetypes. So we have our subgenres. That's going to tell us the sort of things that are possible within this world, and also the kind of fun that we can find there, the sort of appeal. If we want to see people doing fireballs and haidokens and shoryokens and things like that, we probably want to look for adventure historical. If you want to look at, rooms full of people who are on phones and saying things like, "Where is the bomb, MacReady?" You probably want crime or intrigue. And if you want, shooting aliens and stuff, then sci-fi is probably where we get the kind of base appeal. And once we have that, you can move on to your plot archetype to figure out, well, what are the characters actually trying to do, and how do their goals, the pacing, and urgency actually work out? What do those objectives actually look like within this space? So that is going to basically boil down to three things, and these are like the prevailing objective type that your character is going to have in this story. There are going to be different sort of sections of your movie where the character is going to favor one of these over the others, so it's not like they can only do this one thing. But we have attack, defend, and move. So attack means that your characters are trying to take out an opponent or destroy something. Maybe it could be sabotage. They're trying to blow up the enemy base, something like that, right? Your Star Wars blow up the Death Star plot is this. Although it starts as a move. Right? We start by trying to rescue somebody, then we sort of transition into blow up the enemy base. Any movie where we're primarily trying to blow up the enemy base is sort of an attack plot archetype. We have defend, where your characters are primarily trying to defend something. So keep a town safe, keep the castle safe. Ironclad, The Last Stand, Seven Samurai, Assault on Precinct 13. These are going to be your stories where your characters are barricading themselves in, they're setting up the defenses, the tripwires, the mounted machine guns, and they are holding their ground. They sometimes might have to retreat multiple times, so we might have a sort of several move set pieces as your characters try to get from defended location to defended location. And then last we have move, where your characters are trying to get themselves or someone else or something else from one place to another. And I like 310 to Yuma as an example of the sort of escort quest. What is it in video games we call these escort missions? They're sort of notoriously annoying to players in the game, but they can provide great plots because we have, that a built-in dynamic between the person doing the escorting and the person being escorted, and the tension and various conflicts that can arise between them. Fury Road is also this. The Last of Us is also this. So again, any sequence of your movie can have your characters doing some combination of these things, but largely your story is going to primarily have like a sort of super objective that is going to be boiled down to one of these three. Okay, we're not going to look at these right now. These are old at this point. I probably just should update this entire slide. But I just wanted to briefly touch on the idea of hooks. So what is a hook? A hook is sort of a combination of the premise, the main character, and whatever other sort of dynamics leap out and make this stand out as a unique story to us. So it's going to be, it's not always going to be just one clear thing, but could be a combination of several things. Maybe the hook in your story is we have a really unique hero. Maybe the hook is built into the setting. Maybe it's kind of both, right? Think of something like The Matrix. Is Neo really the hook of The Matrix? Not really. He's kind of a blank slate. He doesn't have that strong a personality. And often in the sort of main character syndrome, as we might call it, the hero is not the most interesting person there. Your Luke Skywalkers of the world. The main draw of the story is not their complex psychology. It could be, thinking of something like The Dark Knight. The Joker's complex psychology is kind of at the central hook of that movie. So if you have an interesting character that you want to make part of the hook, then definitely bring that forward. But maybe it's the setting. Maybe it's the type of way that we need to fight the opponent. Maybe it's the specific rules or some kind of urgency that's attached to how we're fighting that opponent. We have, what was it called, 13 blocks. Or that's one where we only have to get from here down the street, essentially. Bruce Willis has to escort Mos Def down 13 blocks of New York City so he can testify against corrupt cops. The hook is kind of in that really brutal fighting from building to building. Like, we're only going a short way, but every cop in the city, every corrupt, evil cop in the city is sort of converging on this one spot, trying to kill and stop these characters from getting to this one point. Really simple central objective, but really formidable, multi-layered, multifaceted opposition towards achieving it. So the specificity of the objectives might be where your hook comes in. It could also be in any number of other things. So just think of what is possible in your world and what's fun about the story, and you can find the hook in there. We shouldn't generally say, well, it's kind of like any other war movie. We can't really lean on, it's like things that have come before it. It's sort of just like we're doing blank. It's sort of like another Die Hard is never going to sell people on the premise alone. There has to be something that sounds fun about the premise. Okay, let's look at different budget tiers. So you don't have to write to a specific budget tier if you're just writing to get better at writing. And this is mostly the type of writing that you're doing if you're trying to learn and to break in. We are trying to write whatever's fun and exciting for you. It doesn't have to have the budget in mind. But if you're writing movies that you want to really get made, there is this lower budget tier of action movies that maybe go to the red boxes and straight to streamers of the world. These are often more driven by smaller production companies that are doing mostly everything in-house. They're not like browsing the blacklist for the best action scripts to be writing. It's possible, especially if you work in the production side, to maneuver your way into writing movies like this. If you're working on these lower tiers, it's going to be very connected to networking and things like this, as they often are. And these are movies that are best approached from this star or stunt-driven perspective. So writing them for a specific star of that kind of budget level is usually a good idea. This is going to be your sort of post-major career stars like your Dolph Lundgren or your Steven Seagals, or it might be just lower-tier pro wrestlers or things like that, people that are trying to break into the action space. It's a tough road to go down writing this sort of movie. So unless you really want to get involved in production, maybe you're a stunt person or actor yourself, and you want to be making that kind of movie for yourself to be the driving force behind, I don't usually recommend writing specifically low-budget action movies. But if you already have a producer that you're working with or something like this, or you have a good contact for how to get a movie made, then obviously it's better to skew on the lower end of budget so that it's more likely to actually be an enticing prospect. Martial arts tournaments are your friend when it comes to budget. It's all people fighting in the same location with the same setups, right? Mid-budget. So this is usually going to be pretty much where most people start writing this kind of movie. These don't get made as much these days, partially because of the comic book movie kind of devouring the mid-budget action, kind of like it devoured action comedy, kind of like it devoured martial arts. It sort of ate up a bunch of those things, so now these are harder to come by, especially if we're going into this without having IP already attached or without having access to IP, which you generally just don't as someone starting out. It's a good place to be, though, because we can write your car chases and your shootouts and things like this, as long as you're not blowing up whole buildings or whole city blocks or showcasing whole fleets of Martian invaders or things like that. It's usually not that hard to keep an action movie in the constraints of the $20 to $50 million range. And that's going to be a safe spot to be, because those feel very scalable in the sense that the producers might say, well, we could remove a couple action scenes and therefore we might be able to actually nudge that budget down. Or if you manage to get just the right arrangement of elements, maybe they would be able to nudge it up and you'd be able to, execute those set pieces and stunts and things like this with even more budget than you had intended. So not that you'd be the director probably on these movies, but these are just things to keep in mind. What it allows you to write and what it allows you to, what tools and toys you have access to within this sort of great toolbox of this writing style. High-budget action movies are usually going to be reserved, in a realistic sense, for very established studio writers. Your Marvel, your Fast and Furious, these are like $100 million plus movies, sometimes getting closer towards $200 million. They're not going to solicit a script worth $200 million for a $200 million movie from someone who's not very entrenched in the system and been doing this for a long time. So I would not expect to be writing high-budget action movies with the expectation of having that movie get made. Doesn't mean you can't write it, though. You could treat it as a writing sample and go as big as you want. If that's the sort of thing you want to eventually write, you should be writing high-budget action. So, clear, high stakes with a unique threat, fun way to combat it. Defining walls, unless you're writing action thriller, is not typically as important as in thrillers themselves, but we expect a bit of a bigger scope in action movies and some measure of shifting fronts. A conflict that's going to be broken into smaller bouts and skirmishes. Unless your whole movie is one extended action sequence, something like the movie Free Fire, which all takes place during one singular shootout in one singular warehouse, and the scenes are sort of like different moments within that shootout, you can do that. That can work, especially on the lower budget range, but it can feel a little stagnant unless you know exactly what you're doing, and it limits the games you can play by far. Look for premises that can support 4 to 6 awesome set pieces. Usually culminating in a stunt is sort of the expectation. It doesn't have to be culminating in a stunt, but we like stunts, and we're watching this sort of movie for stunts. Tangible and concrete goalposts are really important, so carefully, in intrigue especially, avoid this idea of we don't know who the bad guys are and what they're doing for way too long. Otherwise, it might be that you're writing a conspiracy thriller, not really an action movie. Though there is crossover. There's always crossover. The whole Bourne series are mostly action movies with conspiracy thriller plot types. But it's not like we have no idea who the bad guys are or what they're doing for the vast majority of those stories. We understand that the bad guys are the people connected to the Treadstone Project, which are the ones that sort of make super soldier people like Jason Bourne or sleeper agents. Okay, stunts, explosions, fights, chases, daring escapes, thrilling heroics, violence should be fun. Like, these things are so built in, I almost don't even have to, I feel I shouldn't even really have to define this, because if you want to write an action movie, you know that that's what we want to see and that's what you want to write. So, easy, right? And last, something original, something we haven't seen exactly like that before, something new yet also familiar, which is that very common sort of paradigm. Let's not get into action scenes right now. I want to open the floor to questions about action premises. Anyone have a question about things that are viable as action movies, or what makes a good action premise, or anything like this, what we talked about? Okay, I see a question in the chat. What makes an audience hate an action movie? Thank you, Mario. What makes somebody hate an action movie? I mean, it's sort of similar to what makes an audience hate any movie. Lack of engagement. Whoops. Technical difficulties. Lack of engagement, which is going to come from a couple things. One, I can't invest in the main character's journey. I don't understand what they're doing or why, or I just don't want to root for them. So if you have a main character that hates everybody and everybody hates them, and they're doing something horrible that we can't possibly root for, then why are we watching? Is there anyone we can root for? Are we rooting for the villain? If there's literally not one single person to root for and everyone's just horrible and we don't even understand why they're doing what they are, you will lose the audience pretty quickly. We can watch movies about terrible people doing terrible stuff. We can love them. We love unlikable characters, but we have to get them. we have to more or less understand what is motivating them, driving them, and what their next objective is. If we lose that sense of progress through the story, it can be really easy to bore audiences as well. And you see this come up all the time in what I call tunnel movies. And these are going to be a lot of straight to streamers or straight to DVDs back in the day, but they still come out on streamers, now. These are going to be movies that are primarily set in bunkers, caves, or tunnels, and are very hard. It's very difficult to keep track of progress if the environment all looks exactly the same. So lack of progress is going to stem from that problem of your set pieces are not distinct enough, the objectives are not defined enough, or are not, the milestones towards completing those objectives are not clear enough. Or it could be that once we accomplish those objectives, then it's not clear enough what that leads to, or what that now gives us, or how that's affected the shifting fronts, or the balance of power, or the team dynamics. So feeling like the stories are stagnant is going to be one of the biggest killers of action movies. Stagnant meaning simply nothing's changing. We are just watching either the same thing happen every time, we are watching everything play out exactly as we expect it to, or the characters are stuck in one place and not moving and not making any progress. Those are going to be your biggest killers of action-style plot momentum. I following up in the chat. Progress is priority. Attachment is faster, though. Yeah, we might, instead of attachment, I might call it something like investment. We're trying to invest in the journey. It doesn't mean we have to want that person to be our friend in real life. It means that we have to invest a rooting interest in what they're doing and in watching them accomplish that task. Question: if you are allowed a slower pace, you can probably not press down on attachment so hard. Yeah, potentially, and this comes up in the kind of action drama world. Something like Heat or Michael Mann movies have a lot of this sort of vibe, right, where the drama is just as important as the action. They do have a bit of a slower pace, but when we get to those action set pieces, you have to make sure that they really pay off and it's really worth it. Heat is an action drama. It is action because when we get to those set pieces, they're dope. I mean, there's awesome shootouts and chases and stuff in Heat. And the climax is an action scene too, which is usually a pretty key indicator as to what the main genre is. What are we doing in the climax that's telling you that is the kind of like basic appeal of the story? And if we're chasing each other around with guns and shooting at each other, we have an action element there. Collateral, another great sort of action thriller, another Michael Mann movie, where that one's much faster paced, but that one again is a main character pushed to the edge of their competence with a central relationship being with the villain, which is always kind of cool if the hero and villain have that kind of really key relationship with each other and they come to understand something about each other or learn something about each other by the end. And then when we get to the action scenes, of course, they really feel action-ish as well. In Collateral, we have shootouts in the club, we have shootouts in the street, we have car chases, we've got fighting, we've got all kinds of great stuff. So make sure that if you want it to count or to be classified in this action umbrella as well, that when we get to those set pieces, they really pay off. It doesn't feel like primarily a drama. It feels like the drama was supporting and amplifying the action, and vice versa. Bad Boys, yes. Bad Boys series, very popular action central relationship duo. Okay, any other questions on action movie premises? A comment from Stefan: Collateral also has a strong ticking clock while Heat doesn't, so the pace is faster. Yeah, exactly. That's the difference between action drama and action thriller. Thriller will always have that strong propulsive ticking clock, whereas drama does not always need a ticking clock, or if there is one, it can be much slower in the background. All right, any more questions? If not, we're getting towards the end of our first hour, so soon we will be ready to share ideas, brainstorming, or premises, or loglines if you have early versions of those things. Okay, I don't see any other questions for the moment. So instead of talking more about set pieces and bookkeeping and specifics of action writing, because we've gotten to the hour mark, I would rather open it and see how many ideas we have to work with today. So let's just, if you don't know, very quick primer on loglines. The logline is your story distilled down into just a sentence or two. Let's just say one. One sentence. Almost every time I see one that's two, it should be one. You are implying the visual action of the movie by telling us what is it about. Usually that will start by saying your inciting incident. When this thing happens, that's going to be the thing that sets the story into motion. It's not going to be the very first event in the movie usually. You're an adjective protagonist that's telling us who your story is about and what unique tactic they have or limitation they face or what makes them unique. An adjective protagonist must conflict. That's telling us what's in their way, with whom they are clashing, or who the opponent is, who the enemy is, what are they up against. And then before or else stakes. What happens if they fail? Ticking clock, they're trying to stop the terrorists from blowing up the White House, or from killing the main character, or from, stealing a diamond. What is actually at risk is clarified in the stakes. When or after inciting incident, an adjective protagonist must conflict before or in order to stakes. You don't have to use that exact template, but those are the major questions that we have that we'd like to have answered in your logline, and before we can kind of feel like it's a solid and working premise. So there's a lot that goes into this. There's, I think many who have in the past attended logline things find this to be, if they're just starting out, a little more complicated than they first assumed. And that's okay. You're not often going to get this just right on the very first try. Okay, so we have time. You can post in the chat. If you have a logline, go ahead and share it. If you don't have a logline, you only have some kind of brainstorming, or you just want to say, can I talk about my idea? You can write that in the chat as well, and I will call people one at a time in order to share what they have and ask questions and help you improve it and get you on the right track. So I'll give you guys a minute to do that. And we usually go first come, first served. So whoever posts first, just make sure that you're ready when I call on you. And you will have to unmute your mic and speak aloud to answer questions. Okay, I see one comment from Vader. I have a logline I've been developing, though it's very early in development. That's okay. Do you want to get us started? Sure, okay. Feel free to unmute by clicking that gray microphone.
All right, hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you fine.
All right, great.
Let's
so
talk about it. Yeah,
the logline is, yeah, all right. Just let me know if I cut out or anything, because my mic quality can be pretty bad sometimes.
Okay, seems okay.
All right, so the logline is, years after a zombie outbreak reduced the world into a desolate wasteland, a ragtag group of survivors find themselves tasked with escorting humanity's final hope for a cure, the scientists who developed the zombie virus.
All right, thanks for that. So, we're in the post-apocalyptic zombie future, and now the only hope of developing the cure is the scientist that initially created the virus in the first place.
Yes.
I will say, in terms of originality, we've seen this story before, but that's okay. You don't have to worry too much about that.
Yeah.
Don't worry. It's okay. If you're just figuring out the basics, maybe you want to expand the originality or find something more unique in it, or maybe we can dig deeper into what you have and see if you can find something to stand out.
Yeah.
So maybe let's start by asking a question like, what's the setting? Where is this taking place?
In my head, this is taking place in because it is a post-apocalyptic setting. So I don't have exactly a set country or city or something like that. Though I do imagine it takes place in a very, let's say, icy location. So somewhere in the north, maybe?
Did you say icy location?
Yes.
Okay, that could work. The thing about icy locations is that they're pretty much safer from zombies because zombies either freeze in the water or they fall through the ice or things like that. So you can see people migrating north to avoid the worst of the zombie attack in the first place.
Yes.
It would make sense. And also is not something we see as much in zombie-type stories. We have seen dead snow and things like this, but I'm thinking specifically of the Resident Evil franchise. We have a couple movies that are set in very desert-ish we've seen a lot of post-apocalyptic deserts, but we haven't seen as many post-apocalyptic tundras or, icy environments or things like this. So I could see that working.
Yes.
It does have that built-in question of how are the zombies still a threat if it's so bitterly cold? So maybe you need more advanced than normal zombies, perhaps? Or were you thinking the slow,
Yeah,
shambling,
that
biting
was
kind? Go ahead.
yeah, that was an idea that I did get because, like I said, this is a story very early in development. So
Mm-hmm.
a lot of ideas being bounced around, a lot of brainstorming, etc., etc. But I did have an idea of the zombies being very advanced since obviously this is years after the initial outbreak. So maybe they've evolved somehow. Maybe they've adapted somehow.
Okay. Are you thinking more Resident Evil style, like monsters, or are they more like traditional zombies?
A mix of both, really. Resident Evil is definitely kind of the main inspiration, or not the main inspiration, but the main spark that inspired me to really think of a zombie story in this way.
Mm-hmm. And the later ones
So I'd
almost all
say
take,
so.
like the later movies, almost all take place in a very post-apocalyptic world, considering the apocalypse happens at the end of
Yeah,
movie
yeah,
one. Like, so it's almost
yeah, yeah.
exclusively a post-apocalyptic franchise. But for instance,
Yes, yes.
what's that one? Is it called Extinction that takes place in Vegas?
Yeah, the very desert-ish one. Yeah, I think that's extension.
Yeah, so that's kind of fun, right? Like the fact that it takes place. What's it? Army of the Dead also takes place in Las Vegas, I think.
Oh yes, yes.
Right.
Zack Snyder. Yeah.
So that tells us different games that we have available to us and different sorts of fun that we can have there. Army of the Dead even features a kind of hierarchy of evolved zombies that take on almost commander type positions within. It's called. That's why it's called Army of the Dead, I guess, right? Because they're a little bit more.
Yeah, yeah.
What is it they say in Chicken Run? They're organized. So that's
Yeah.
part of the fun there. So maybe in zombie stories, the hook is going to come in one of a couple things. We have the hook can be your hero. The Last of Us, the dynamic between the hero and the central relationship is the hook of the story. The hook can be the villains. Think of something like Left 4 Dead. Have you played those games?
No, I have not.
Okay, but or Resident Evil is another example with really specific types of monsters that are not just your regular shambling bite you type of zombie enemy, right?
Yeah.
So that could be unique about it. Maybe the setting could be part of the uniqueness too. The objective or the specifics of accomplishing that objective or the rules of the virus itself, because the rules are pretty key to understanding these stories, aren't they? Because it's like the rules being if you get bitten, how long do you have? Can you cut that limb off
Yeah.
and survive? Train to Busan, or did you? I would, if you haven't seen Train to Busan and its sequel, which is called Peninsula, I also really recommend those two.
Well, I have seen Train to Busan, though I actually didn't know it had a sequel.
Oh, it does. It's a standalone sequel, so none of the same characters,
Mm.
but it's in the same world, and it's awesome. Uh, if you like the first one, you'll probably like it.
Yeah, I love the first one. Yeah.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant writing. And the hook in that one, well, there's a couple different aspects to that. So in Train to Busan, the zombies work a little differently than we've seen before. They have this kind of swarm type mentality and really quick movement, and they sort of pile up on each other and stuff like this. We see a bit of that in World War Z, but there's not a ton of that. And then the characters themselves are also just really, really fleshed out, and like the dynamics between the characters, the relationships, and the central relationship between the father-daughter arc are really core to Train to Busan as well. So it might just be that you
Yes,
need
yes.
to zero in on something to find some unique fun in the premise. Do you have any questions you want to ask about that, or is there a direction you were thinking of going, or are you still too early to say for sure?
Hmm. Well, I would be inclined to say that it's too early to say for sure, but this is one of those stories that I felt like kind of developing in more of a quick way so that I can just get the first draft out there and re-edit it and all that.
Sure.
So I do have a question then. Yeah, I do have some questions about which direction that would take.
Okay, hit me.
So like zeroing in on something, I would hmm, I would definitely say for me personally, I would like to zero in on the character relationships. I feel like that would be somewhat of a trope, with zombie stories. It's always about the characters. It's always about the interpersonal relationships. But I do find that very compelling. So I would say that that's where I would like to go. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I would say it's not really a trope. It's as much as it is every great story is about characters and relationships. So that
Yeah,
is just
definitely,
something that
definitely, yeah.
yeah. So but I see what you mean. So that is like a common thing that the movies will flesh out, like Dawn of the Dead, for instance. Really interesting web of
Yes.
characters there. Um, so if you are interested in that central dynamic, it seems like the only characters you have nailed down are going to be your escort team, and then you have the guy that made the virus. Why did the guy make the virus? Might be a question to start with.
Definitely, definitely. I was actually kind of circling that around my head as we were talking, or as you were talking.
Sure.
But I don't really have an answer to that yet because
okay.
I just really started thinking about that. So yeah.
Maybe he has an
But that is definitely
reason.
an area to focus on.
Yeah, maybe that character. We have seen this type of character before. The first Resident Evil movie does feature guy that unleashed the virus or whatever. But rarely do we really delve too deeply into why they did it. Do they have some kind of good reason for it?
Exactly, yes.
Do you think he was doing the right thing? Is he happy with how it turned out? Is he looking at the world going like, oh, good job, I nailed it, this is awesome? Like, does he like the world as it is? And questions like that might kind of force you to dig deep into who this person is in general. Are they crazy, or are they like ahead of their time? Were they right about something? Maybe digging into these questions can lead you down the avenue of figuring out what is unique and compelling about a character like this in the first place.
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
I did just now get some ideas on that, but yeah, definitely.
Okay.
I do understand this thing.
Do you want to share, or do you have another question that you wanted to focus on?
Oh, yes, sure, yes. I did have some idea of, well, while you were talking, I did circle around some idea in my head about maybe the zombie virus initially wasn't even a bioweapon. It was a project of his that was then taken and made into a bioweapon somehow, science shenanigans or something. And then, he wants to redeem himself in a way. He wants to have that redemption because he feels like he's responsible for the end of the world, even though maybe, if we really go technically on it, he didn't actually end the world. It wasn't him who made the virus, technically speaking.
Right.
It was some other entity.
I see what you mean.
But
This is good. This sort of I Am Legend has a little bit of this with, I believe the virus in that one was intended to be some kind of cure for cancer or something like that. And then it mutates out of control and spreads and turns people into super vampires. So good job, cancer doctors.
Yes.
But having that kind of sense of personal responsibility in the apocalypse is quite a strong motivator. So maybe there's something there. I mean, if every zombie that he sees is a reminder of his crimes and his failures and his betrayal of the human race, there's a very tortured, very complicated person that could be at the root of that.
Definitely, yes. And I even get ideas of maybe there are characters who, since they have this hope of a cure, they feel somewhat guilty of even murdering these zombies, to defend themselves, because they're like, well, what if they could be cured? What if all this could end, right? Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of avenues there.
Sure, and especially if this character is famous, as in anybody who runs into them would know who they were. Like, imagine if it was
yes.
If it's your Jeff Bezos level of tech celebrity, then everybody, their faces might have been on billboards for their medical procedures or whatever. Those billboards are still there, so everybody could just look up and be like, "Hey, who did this? You did this, right?" That's kind of cool.
Yeah, exactly.
I think keep digging there. There's something compelling that almost makes that feel like that's your main character.
Ooh, the scientist.
The scientist guy. Maybe that's the hero.
Maybe that is a great idea. Maybe.
Yeah, dig in there. See what you can find.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else, or do you want to wrap up?
Were there any other?
Yeah.
I was about to ask. Were there any other questions you had about the logline or anything?
For now, I think we just need to dig deeper. So I've asked the questions that I need to for the moment. And if the hook that you want to find is a character hook, then you got to figure out who your characters are.
Yes, definitely.
Cool. Thanks for sharing. Keep working on this. It could be like you can always start with, I want to do a zombie movie. I want to do a car chase movie. You can always start with that, and then from there, get more granular and specific. Think, what have I never really seen in this genre before? I've never really seen the person that made all the zombies be particularly characterized before. That's a cool idea. Maybe
definitely. That was actually my original idea. Was this all came about because I was literally watching a video about Resident Evil, and I was like, oh yeah, I want to write a zombie story now. So yeah, that's kind of how it always starts.
Great. Well, I think you're definitely onto something.
All right, thank you. Yeah, and thanks for the opportunity to share.
No worries. Thanks so much for sharing. Let's keep going. Um, I see one from the Nerd Geek. Do you want to go next?
So basically, mine is a superhero story. First off, I'm trying to make sure is as low budget as possible because this is the first movie I've ever written. So basically, my story is this kid, Andrew Perkins. It starts out with him and his friend. They're walking around, then she gets kidnapped. So he, a year later, gets superpowers and also finds out that she is dead. And then he decides to put it upon himself to hunt down the killer who did it. Meanwhile, though, a former friend of his gets superpowers of her own where she becomes this like Hulk like monstrosity. And he has to put aside finding his friend's killer to stop her.
Wait, that's a separate goal that's not attached to finding the killer, or she doesn't like work for the killers or something like that.
No, she does not.
So that's just an entirely separate subplot.
Yes.
Okay, that seems like a mistake to me just from the outset. You typically will want to connect everything together in your story and say, like, this isn't a random, unrelated thing happening somewhere else. This ties into the A story. Can I ask a quick question? Why a year later?
Um, I just feel like it could be like, I don't know, it just kind of came to me like basically this whole year he's been trying to figure out what happened to her, and then just it hits him a lot harder that she's dead.
Oh, okay, so he's been frantically searching the whole time.
Yeah,
And does everybody else think that she's dead, or has assumed that? Is that what you're thinking?
pretty much, yeah.
Okay, so when he finally does find her, then he's so overwhelmed by that, and so he had built up so much hope that it kind of breaks him, and now he's like, I have to take these bastards down. Is that right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, okay, I can start to see it. So when you say a kid, how old is a kid?
Okay, like not a kid, like a 17-year-old teenager.
Okay, a teenager, got it. So, teenager, this sounds like they're more than. Most people would not just do this for a friend. Are they like best friends or lovers or something
Yeah,
like that?
best friends.
Best friends, okay. But just platonic best friends?
Yes.
Okay, platonic best friends. His platonic best friend gets kidnapped, spends a year as an amateur sleuth, I guess, essentially, trying to track her down. Now he's 18, right?
Yes.
Okay, so he's 18, he's out of school soon, I would think. He finds out the truth, and then he's like, I'm going to take these guys down. At what point did he get powers?
Yes. Soon after he finds out she's dead, like a day or two later, um, his powers are basically has enhanced strength and enhanced speed and can hit really hard.
Okay. And where did those come from?
That I have not totally figured out yet how I'm gonna do that.
That's okay. So my suggestion for you is going to be to tie these things together as much as you can, right? Even in the world, I understand that in the world of comic book style storytelling, sometimes people just get powers from separate stuff. Or sometimes two separate unrelated things happen because we're in comic book world and therefore it can kind of work sometimes. But the more that you can tie them together, those are usually going to be the stronger stories. Those are going to be the ones where you've got, what is it? Superman and the other enemy Kryptonians are all from the same planet, at least, right? They share a source. They share a common origin.
Yeah.
Or what's that later? Didn't they do a later Hulk movie with Edward Norton, which has you mentioned a Hulk type character.
Sorry, I missed that.
So there was a Hulk movie with Edward Norton where he's fighting against an opponent played by Tim Roth who has similar Hulk powers to him because he was also created by gamma rays, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that's what I'm talking about in terms of common source. Like, and that's why I guess the question of it takes a full normally we want to tie these events together as much as you can. So I'm just going to give you an example. For instance, his friend gets kidnapped by bad guys that have super technology. They put her in a force field or something. As he's chasing them, he blows up one of their chemical tanks and it gets chemicals on him, and then he gets powers from that. That's a dumb example, but do you see how those powers would then come from the same source, and therefore it just feels a little more cohesive overall? So I would try to see if you can tie, if you're not sure yet what the powers are exactly, where they come from, if they come from technology, from aliens, from magic, wherever they're coming from, if you can make them come from the same place and have that kind of common connecting thread between the speculative elements of your story, it's usually going to feel like it's going to make more sense in people's minds and require them not to be like, wait, huh? Like, was there a comic book I was supposed to read before I watched the movie or something like that?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's just some tips for you for now. Do you have any maybe questions or areas you wanted to take it, or something you wanted to ask about to refine this any further?
No.
Okay, so maybe dig deeper into, similar to the last one, try to find what is your hook. The hook is going to be what is unique and fun about this, because we've seen a lot of revenge movies and we've seen a lot of superhero movies, and we've seen a lot of superhero revenge movies.
It's gonna basically, I'm gonna try and touch on things that superhero movies don't touch on, but would be the case if they were real. For example, he has massive PTSD from what happened with his friend. And yeah.
Okay, so sort of just more psychological realism and intensity than most comic movies have, you think?
Yeah.
Okay, you could do that.
Yeah.
You could definitely do that for sure. That will require you to figure out who your characters are a little more, and if you want the drama to be a big selling point, then you got to do the drama well. So make sure you flesh out your hero, flesh out your villain, really make sure that they have, compelling psychological reasons behind what they're doing. Maybe his whole revenge quest is a sort of symptom of his PTSD in a certain way. Maybe he's so traumatized the only way he feels that he can heal is by getting this revenge, and even as everyone in his family is telling him, you have to stop. Like, that's a deeply unhealthy thing to do.
Yeah.
So give that some thought. Flesh out your characters more, and maybe that hook will sort of be able to clarify a little better.
All right.
Okay, if you don't have any more questions for now, we'll move on to the next one. Hope that gives you a good place to start.
Yes, thank you.
No problem. And definitely check out Chronicle if you haven't. That's a great kind of like... You've probably seen it, I'm guessing. But if anyone hasn't seen it, it's a good movie. Okay, we've got time for more. Let's keep going. I see the next one is... Let me scroll up. Mario.
When the Dark Lord severely maims the Chosen One, the survivors must hide out in the lair of the previous Dark Lord, the only one who can heal their injured friend. But have they just exchanged one danger for another? Because the previous Dark Lord collects bodies as hosts to control, and no body is more powerful than that of the Chosen One.
Whoa, okay, a lot of information there. I think we might have to just slow down a little bit. Is this a logline, or is this kind of just a description of the premise?
It's pretty much for a logline.
It's a logline. Okay, this is several sentences, though.
It's just two. I just decided to not have a run-on.
Well, it's kind of three. You have a dot, and then a separate clause in the middle there.
I just did that for dramatic purposes.
Okay. In any case, it's a lot to take in, and it's a lot to process and understand. I'm going to read it back and make sure I'm grasping it. When the Dark Lord... Okay, what world are we in? Are we in like a secondary fantasy world like Middle-earth?
It's the comp is Harry Potter.
Okay, so it's a portal fantasy?
Yeah, it's like a Harry Potter world. Just think Harry Potter went after things went haywire.
When did things go haywire in Harry Potter? You mean the very start of the series?
At the end of the movie.
At the end of which movie?
The last one.
At the end of
the very last, the seventh one.
So, after Harry Potter's done and the pieces restored to the world?
No, right before the battle, and that's the Dark Lord has ambushed them, and they're planning stages, and even before they begin their attack, the Dark Lord comes in and f's up the whole battle, right? And the hero, right, is severely maimed, and he escapes with like barely any of his life because the previous Dark Lord helped him, and they are now in a room. The chosen one is like half dead, and his friends are blaming each other. And the previous Dark Lord says one of you betrayed them, and that's kind of like the engine of the story.
Okay, so I think I still need to maybe just go through one question at a time to make sure that I'm fully grasping it. So, are we on Earth?
Yes.
We are. Okay. So, is this modern day Earth?
Yes, it's a modern day It's Harry Potter.
Right, but Harry Potter takes place in between two different worlds. The Wizarding world is a sort of hidden world beyond a sort of portal-like obfuscation. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So, like in Harry Potter, they really rarely go back into the human world. So, like, it's still the Wizarding world, right? But it's just the hidden one room setup. Think the Reservoir Dogs warehouse, but with a flu shoot, with a magical accoutrement. Brick.
Okay. So we're in a modern day urban fantasy portal type world where there is a real world as well, but we're spending most of our time in the magic place, right?
We're spending all our time in one room.
In one room.
Yeah. It's like a warehouse. Reservoir Dogs magical warehouse. It's the previous Dark Lord's lair, his safe house.
Okay, hang on. Let's slow down. Just one thing at a time. So, you mentioned there is a sort of Dark Lord and a sort of chosen one as well. So you're talking in terms of the tropes of those characters? So
yes, the tropes.
Okay.
Yes, the tropes.
So in terms of tropes, the Dark Lord is usually going to be a very powerful, evil magic user that usually wants to either wipe out the good people or wipe out everybody. Is that the case?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the case.
So what is he trying to do? Wipe out the good people or everyone?
He's trying to take over the society.
Take over the magical society. Okay.
Yeah, he's Voldemort. Yes.
Okay. So is there a sort of central institution like a school or something like that that you are talking about?
Yes, there is a school, but I felt like introducing it here is too much, right?
Well, no, we don't have any context without it though. You're just talking about characters and tropes, and we don't even know where or when we are.
Like, so, I'm not sure we need to have to know when and where we are when it's basically like I would start off with the comps being, imagine if Harry Potter, right, before the last battle, the group was our heroes, our Scooby Gang was ambushed.
Okay.
Right. And the remaining survivors.
But in your logline, you can't just say it's like Harry Potter. Not everyone's going to know what you mean. There's not one central common definition of Dark Lord or of Chosen One. Those are tropes that exist in many different stories and mean many different things in those stories, right?
Okay, I see what you mean. It has to be more. It can't really rely on depending on Harry Potter being universal.
Exactly. We wouldn't have that frame of reference unless you tell us that, and you can't usually include that. So
okay, so I should be before. I should realize. Okay, in this urban fantasy setting, right before a battle, this group of Scooby Bang, and the Chosen One gets ambushed, and now they have to hold up in a untrustworthy ally's lair, and you don't know if he's part of it or what, but also they have to figure out the traitor within. That would probably be the log.
Yeah, so the first part of that made a lot more sense to me. So if you give it that little bit of context and help ground us just a little bit. So this is the friends and peers of the sort of Chosen One that's supposed to defeat this Dark Lord who's trying to take over the magic society. And so the story, I guess you'd want to clarify in your logline that it all takes place in one location. You're saying they must hide out in the lair of the previous Dark Lord, the only one who can heal their injured friend. Wait, is the previous Dark Lord still alive?
Yes, he is. Like Grindelwald.
I don't know who that. I'm not a big Harry Potter guy. I don't know who Grindelwald is.
Oh, okay, sorry. So there's multiple Dark Lords. There's always a Dark Lord for every generation.
Okay.
And before the big bad in Harry Potter, there was Grindelwald, which was Dumbledore's rival.
I see.
So
okay.
Basically, yeah.
So kind of like Morgoth in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
But don't include a rhetorical question in the log line just because it's better to answer it than to ask. Because the previous Dark Lord collects bodies as hosts to control, and no body is more powerful than that of the Chosen One. Okay, so it sounds like you're saying you're doing sort of a Reservoir Dogs style story where the allies they're kind of like on the verge of defeat sort of thing, like the Dark Lord struck a blow against them and now they're just trying to recover and recalibrate. Is that right?
That's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe you would say like after a raid on their magic school, a group of survivors, like a group of the fated heroic Chosen One and his group of friends take shelter in blank and blank place, and now must blank before blank. So try to really keep it as concise as you can. Are they trying to escape? Are they trying to defeat the villain? Are they trying to identify a traitor? It sounds like maybe one or two of those things.
It's like almost the same as Reservoir Dogs. They're trying to survive, right? And since one of them is a traitor, they don't trust enough each other. They can't let anyone leave.
Okay, so this is sort of a dramatic mystery where it's mostly the characters talking it out and trying to figure out.
It's a character story hidden as a fantasy kind of a high price. It's like high budget story. It looks like a high budget story, but it's actually a talking head story.
Okay, cool. So after asking all that and kind of refining, I think I do understand a little more. I would try to simplify and ground this as much as possible, just in terms of the logline that you have here has made a lot of assumptions about background knowledge that the reader would have. Pretend like we have never heard of Harry Potter. We don't know what it is. And then if you write a logline that can kind of introduce, imagine your grandma is reading this, right? And she's like, oh, okay, I can kind of understand the basics of what's happening here. And if you can combine it all into one sentence, I know it might feel a little reductive, but it is just going to, it tells us it's clear what's important if it's all one sentence. If you have 3 sentences, it's not as clear what is actually important here.
Yeah.
Cool. Questions?
Okay, got it. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. All right, we have time for more. We have half an hour left. Look at all these great loglines. Thank you, everybody, for sharing. I hope this has been informative and helpful and everything else. Shall we proceed? Nacho, are you the next one? Nacho Dash?
Sure, yeah. If you want to, I don't know if you want to try to fit the other folks in first. If there's time, we can talk about mine.
Sure, I'll prioritize the others, but if there's... Nacho's our co-founder, for anyone who doesn't know, by the way. Let's give him a big round of applause. Yay! There it is. Okay. Yeah, sure, we can do yours at the end. We'll figure out the other ones first. Okay, Stefan, Fall of Saigon.
Yeah, hey. Also, thank you, Nacho, for giving me your place. I really appreciate it. So, Fall of Saigon. When his mistake gets a Vietnamese spy killed, a guilt-ridden CIA agent races to save the dead man's family before the Viet Cong marches in and the city falls. I see it as Dunkirk meets The Year of Living Dangerously. It's a really old idea that I had for a couple of years, but I haven't written anything basically for it yet.
Okay, I like it. Let me just read it one more time so I'm grasping everything. So when his mistake gets... This is set during the Vietnamese War? Or during the Vietnam War, right?
Yeah, the last days of Vietnamese War.
Oh, okay, you can maybe include that. In the last days of the Vietnam War, his mistake gets a Vietnamese spy killed, a guilt-ridden CIA agent, because there's multiple factions of Vietnamese. There's like North Vietnamese and also South Vietnamese factions, right?
Yeah.
So you mean someone on the American U.S. Allied side.
Yeah.
A guilt-ridden CIA agent races to save the dead man's family before the Viet Cong marches in and the city falls. Really nice ticking clock. Really great core to this one. Nice work. I would recommend maybe one of your comps could be... did you watch Guy Ritchie's The Covenant?
Yeah, just a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, not a 10 out of 10 movie, but a pretty good premise. And that idea of like this loyalty that you build to somebody on your side, and then you have to kind of make good on that loyalty even after the conflict is over, or... I don't know. It's a really rich character space. So nice basics of the premise. I think that for this one, I kind of want to know, is this going to be kind of just like a series of set pieces where it's more going to be about the characters versus the environment trying to escape the city, or is there like a villain?
More against the environment. So the chaos, the panic... Random soldiers, random enemy soldiers would show up during the set pieces, but there wouldn't be like a villain.
Okay, cool. Understood. So in that case, this is more about the people versus the environment, and more of an adventure overall than action, I would say. But that's okay. Let me just read one more time and see if there's anything I can add. It's mistake. It's the Vietnamese spy kill. I would just add that little bit of context so we know when and where we are.
Yeah, I actually have a logline that begins in the last days of Vietnamese War, and then I removed it. I felt it was maybe a bit too much.
I think it's important just because there have been Vietnamese spies.
To give people extra context of when it's happening. Yeah, absolutely.
Right, exactly. And then guilt-ridden CIA agent. I guess maybe the I do understand what you're going for with the character. I understand his motivation and why he's doing this. But it is the sort of situation where anybody would be guilt-ridden after... It's like saying, after he's attacked by a shark, a desperate man must escape, right? It's like anyone who's attacked by a shark would be desperate. So can you...
I was actually playing around before I posted it. I had jaded instead of guilt-ridden, and I was going between those two.
Okay, jaded. So is he sort of past his prime, like on his way out?
Yeah. And he's disillusioned with the war and everything, the way it's going on. Yeah, so maybe guilt-ridden is redundant, and then I can put jaded instead.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Or if you can frame some other way of saying, past his best years, disillusioned, something like that. That's just going to kind of emphasize why is this particular guy the lead, and it sounds like that's going to make his journey harder if he's like no longer in peak shape. He's no longer as dedicated to this. It'll be physically and psychologically more difficult for him to accomplish the task. Right.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. So that's the only little adjustments that I would make. But you have a really strong core here.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. And great tips. Really appreciate them as well.
No problem. Nice work.
Thank you.
Sometimes there's just a couple little changes to make, and the logline's mostly already working. Dunkirk is also another good example, because that one doesn't really have that sense of villains to it. The villains are almost kind of like in shadow. Like, we don't ever see a Nazi in Dunkirk, which is sort of weird. And a very cool touch. All right, IB.
Main character. After finally gaining financial stability, a mild-mannered influencer must find a way to detach herself from her toxic writer friend without him ruining her reputation. Yeah.
All right. Is this a thriller?
Yes.
A thriller. Okay. So we're out of the action world, but that's okay.
Sorry. I feel like there could be a little bit of action there, depending on if it sort of picks up a little bit towards the end.
Fair enough, but a little bit of action usually will not cause us to reclassify it as an action film overall. But that's okay. You can write a thriller if you want. Let me read it again. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. So the name of the movie's main character?
Yes.
Okay. After finally gaining financial stability, meaning that her business picked up to the point where she's now making a lot of money.
Yeah. So she's an influencer, so she's finally got enough followers to be able to make money from it.
Yeah, that's if you're an influencer, that's your business. So she got sponsorships and stuff like this, and she broke out big. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
A mild-mannered influencer must find a way to detach herself from her toxic writer friend without him ruining her reputation. So, why are they attached? Did he write her content or something like that?
That they've been friends for years. Like he's her oldest friend.
What does that have to do with her success as an influencer, though?
Oh, it doesn't have anything to do with her success, but
it doesn't.
Because she has the success now, she finally sort of is gaining a bit of confidence, so she feels like she's able to. It's sort of this success has put her like life in perspective, and she finally realizes she doesn't have to be friends with this person anymore.
Okay, that seems problematic to me then, because that you could have had anything as your catalyst then. When she gets a new car, a mild-mannered influencer must find a way to detach herself from her toxic writer friend without him ruining her reputation, right? See, those events are not linked.
That's true.
So maybe, why not just have it so that he was her content writer before, and now she's broken out big and she can hire someone else? Or maybe he was her editor. Or moderator. That's a big thing. Isn't that where like all these Twitch-type people will sometimes have moderators that stick with them for a long time, and then they blow up big and they fire them, and it's a huge betrayal. Maybe something like that.
Well, I mainly want to have this sort of the idea about it. I wanted to have this sort of very like I wanted it to be someone who was very close to her, but also sort of this very toxic, very sort of creepy kind of person that sort of has his sort of throughout the film is sort of it sort of makes your skin crawl watching him, and sort of he's very manipulative, and he's sort of all of that kind of thing. That's why I added the comps of Cape Fear, that kind of the manipulation kind of thing.
Okay. It still feels like he needs to be more connected to the character or the situation or the catalyst in some way. Like, why did her becoming successful, why is that the thing that causes her to now either break away from him? Maybe she now has the ability to break away from him. I think it needs to be more so than just she was inspired to do it, just because you could be inspired to break away from a toxic relationship by almost anything. She goes to therapy and thinks, oh, now I have to cut that relationship off. Why does it have to do with success? Which is why I was kind of tying back to the idea of, did he work on her old channel? Was he responsible for her initial success or something like that? Maybe that's a direction you could go. Go ahead.
Maybe they were, I try to think maybe they were roommates, and now she can move out and she can live somewhere else.
That definitely works. Yeah, or her old landlord or something like that. They probably wouldn't be like friends exactly if he were the landlord, but sometimes there's odd arrangements like that work out. So yeah, try to tie the different elements together more, so it feels like this one situation could only happen in this one way. It shouldn't feel like here's a bunch of things that happen in a story that could have happened in a different story or in a different order. One thing should lead to the next thing. So this influx of money causes her to move out of the house with this crazy guy, and now he wants to sort of, maybe he even thought they were always secretly together or something like that, or he was waiting for her to finally notice him, senpai or whatever it is, right? So at this point, maybe that's the catalyst, maybe that's what drives him nuts. What do you think? You don't have to have the answers now, but you can brainstorm if you want.
I'll be honest with you, because I wanted to write something where, because you have lots of films where it's about sort of a plucky writer finally getting their big break, and I wanted to have it where the writer was the villain, because I feel like as writers we don't usually want to put ourselves as the villain. But I thought it would be fun if the writer's the villain, they're sort of this dead weight on her, and just sort of look at all like the negative things that people like, being a little bit too pushy about sort of his book maybe is sort of very high and mighty kind of thing, sort of all the negative things that there is from the profession. That was sort of what I wanted from it, if that makes sense.
But so if his writing is not connected to what she does at all, then it doesn't really matter that she's an influencer. This could have been about a lady that just won the lottery.
Yeah, that's true.
So that's why I kept drifting back towards he worked with her or was on her team to begin with. A lot of influencers have a team of people that work with them. A writer could be among them, especially if they're doing sketches or stand-up or skits or web series or something along those lines. So maybe the type of influencer that she is could give you some inspiration as to who would work with them and who would be dependent on that success.
Or I don't know, maybe she was just like influencing them of books and things like that, and because she talks about books and things like that, he wants her to talk about his book on her channel.
Okay. So yeah, that's kind of booktube, as that's sometimes called, or bookfluencers or things like that. Yeah, maybe she gives him a bad review and that could send him over the edge, or something like this. But I would do some thinking as to how to connect. It's okay if you don't have the answers now, but just especially for a thriller, we need to be in that world of everything's connected, everything's high concept, nothing's out of place. And so to that end, we should feel like the catalyst motivates the story and drives the story, and could only happen in this one specific way. So think a little, I guess, just over the next couple days about how could you tie these characters together more. Could they have worked together? Could he be responsible for that success? Could they be in love, or he's in love with her at least? What is it that makes them initially inseparable, or makes this harder than just, I don't know, get a restraining order?
Well, I think it's again because he's her oldest friend, and so she sort of feels a certain level of loyalty to him, but at the same time, because they're friends for so long, he also has sort of knowledge about her that, as she's an influencer, he could like frame it in a certain way and cause problems for her, and it sort of, as she's quite mild-mannered, she's very worried about, are people going to believe what he says, even if some of the things may not be necessarily true or sort of brought or blown out of proportion kind of thing.
Okay.
So
So,
she's worried about the. Sorry.
I apologize. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, after you.
Okay, so I was thinking on some level, maybe you want to move the events of the Catalyst forward a little bit and maybe just something like when her former business partner, when her former, I don't know, whatever it is, former best friend starts a harassment campaign against her for after her success or something like that. A mild-mannered influencer must go to, increasingly dangerous extremes to stop him. Or something like that. That might kind of have that little bit more intensity to it. That kind of feels like a Korean thriller in a way.
Yeah.
So maybe consider moving the events forward just a little bit so that we can start with that thing, start with the success happening, rather than, it's not so much about her trying to find a way to detach herself from him. Think of what is it that he actually does that's threatening her and start with that. When she starts getting harassed by her former blank and blank, a newly successful influencer must now blank. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I said the reason why she was an influencer is to add that sort of reason she has to tiptoe around, stop being friends with him. She can't just go, "Oh, I'm no longer friends with you." And I said also just because I think this restraining order thing, they're not always they're not always that effective for some people. So that could also be something that I could bring into the story as well. This idea of maybe she does get a restraining order and it just doesn't work, and the police are to go, "Oh," they maybe put him in prison for a day or two, and he comes back right back out again, kind of thing.
Sure. Or can I just make a suggestion for a small change that would, I think, really galvanize the story too?
Yeah.
He's also an influencer, not a writer. Or I mean, writers can be influencers, but he is an influencer with clout, and maybe that's how she got her start. And he helped, and that way you would have both a great reason why she couldn't just separate from the friendship, because the connections she has with the same people as him are really tying them together, and a lot of people would take his side and stuff like that too. And also he would have much more social power. He's not just some nobody writer. And also it would give him a vested interest in her success, in the sense that he could say, or like a sort of shared collective responsibility of her success. He could say, "I helped make you, I let you stay in my house, I let you use my equipment, and this is how you repay me." Just kind of ties them together even tighter. I don't know if that works at all, but what do you think?
I feel like there's been a lot of stories around that kind of thing, and I just want to do something different. And I said I mainly wanted, the main idea was around the toxic writer and sort of him going more and more insane. But I wasn't, and this idea of the person trying to escape from him as that happens. And as I said, I chose the influencer because I thought it would be another reason for her to tiptoe around, as I said, detaching herself. But it doesn't have to be an influencer. I just thought it would be an interesting character.
Okay, but if his writing is not connected at all to what she does or her success, then why is he a writer? Why does it even matter? I'm just looking for ways that these things can connect. You can think of whatever you want. That's just where my brain went initially. I guess I would just dig a little deeper into what is the hook of the story. What makes this different from the other stalker type stories we've seen before, and how does everything wrap up nicely and tie together? So look for those sort of connections between things to draw.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Thanks for sharing this. And what was it? It was called main character. Yeah, or maybe is this a new thing people are saying? Is it main character syndrome? Is that what people call it? Where yeah, maybe main character syndrome would be a cool title too. Okay, let's keep going. We have Talking Cheeto Puffs, The Lair. Oh, I see some comps I like. Are you there, Mr. Cheeto Puffs? Hi, can you speak up? I thought I heard you.
I'm here.
Okay, good. Hi, how's it going? Why don't you read out for us what you've got?
Alright. After the war World Martial Arts Tournament concludes, a small group of finalists are graduated to another round known as the layer.
Okay, your mic level's a little low. I'm going to turn your volume up, but I heard what you said. I'm just going to read it out just in case anyone missed it and for the recording. So, after the World Martial Arts Tournament concludes, a small group of finalists are graduated to another round known as the lair. Okay, cool. So I guess in what you're saying is this is a sort of higher stakes secret final round that they have the opportunity to compete for a bigger prize, but also probably life and death stakes. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
Okay, I'm just guessing based on your comps. Okay, so this sounds cool. I think you're going to want to find a hero. You got to find your main character here that feels like they have a motivation to do this. Maybe has, if the cash prize goes up in a big way, this could have that kind of Squid Game kind of quality of like, well, you want more, so you got to sign on the dotted line if you want an opportunity to make the big bucks, but you might not make it back home, sort of thing. So maybe a hero with a really strong, clear sense of motivation. You might want to think of what the hook could be also in terms of is there a villain or an opponent or somebody throwing this tournament, and if so, why? If you need more time to think of these things, that's cool. I could just give you some suggestions of stuff you could dig into.
All right, I got it.
Okay, and also, so be thinking too of in tournament-style stories, besides the main character and the villain, we also kind of want to know, are there any specific rules to this particular arena? Does this take place in a room that's constantly getting smaller? Does it take place in the Alps, like in a bunch of arenas that are going to be, bridges between narrow mountain passes? Does this all take place in a high-tech facility, like the Man of Tai Chi with Keanu Reeves? Does it take place in a castle? How we can maybe just kind of zero in on what could the hook of the story be? Because we've seen a million, or I at least, have seen a million martial arts tournament movies. So try to find what's unique and fun about this one and really amplify that and bring that to the forefront for the logline.
Gotcha.
Cool. Any questions?
Mm-mm.
No questions for now? All right. So you've got a good foundation. Martial arts tournament, you can't go wrong. Makes for great low-budget action-type stories, so dig deeper, find what's unique, and find what's extra fun about this.
All right.
All right, thanks a lot. So we have time for one more, but I want to just remind everybody that the idea this week is to refine your loglines this week, and then next week there's another free class where you can sort of pitch your movie idea and get more feedback on the refined, amplified, enhanced version of this idea, whether it's action or anything else. So next Friday's class is going to be at the same time from 6 to 8, and you can come back with whatever work you've done in the meantime on your updated version of your logline or of your premise, or maybe if you didn't have a logline before, then you can write one in the meantime. And then next week, same time, come back and get ready to expand more and talk about what's so awesome about your idea. And that'll be how we lead into our feature bootcamp for this session. So we do have time for, is there another one? Let me see. Nacho has to go in a minute, I think. Nacho, do you have time to do yours, or do you have to run now?
I need to start the table reads.
Okay, that's all.
Yeah.
Thank you anyway for everyone. I think that is everyone. Did I miss anyone? Let me know now. It looks like everyone. Okay. Great. So thank you everyone for sharing today. This was a lot of fun. I hope that you got some good info on just what an action movie should look like. What are we going to include? All these basic things. But also, like an initial push forward on your idea. If you're looking for how to deepen or broaden your idea, I'm always full of ideas on how to do that and how to find that hook and bring that to the forefront. And we're really always trying to deliver this thing that feels original and fresh and fun and unique and different. But also, at that same time, that's the tricky part. It feels fresh and unique and different, but also like it fits in the box of we know the kind of thing that we're going to get from that movie. We don't know specifically what we're going to get, but we know the type of fun that we're going to have. And that's really at the core of writing a solid premise. So next week, August 16th, finalize your logline this week if you can, and you can pitch that new version of it next week to get it like totally bolted down if you want to. And then you're going to be filling out your sketchbook all this week and next week too. If you have never been in one of my courses before and don't know what a sketchbook is, really it's just a blank Google document with all of your ideas in it. All of your research, influences, inspiration, clips or videos or articles linked, maybe initial ideas for characters or lines of dialogue or rules of the world or plot moments or awesome set pieces or anything like that. So start filling out just one document that is going to contain all of your ideas. They don't have to be in order, they don't have to be organized, and no one else has to read it. But start filling out one document of everything pertaining to this particular movie premise. Or if you're still juggling between different premises, try to nail that down this week and maybe do that work in your sketchbook as well. And then if you have that final version of the logline next week, you can pitch it once again, the improved version. And then we have plenty of stuff coming up. Week 2 is on writing one sheets and story beats. Week 3 is on cards. And then week 4 to 8, we're writing the movie. So in a couple weeks, you will have gone from planning to actually executing the script, writing pages every week, and you're going to finish that script by October 11th if you stick with the milestones of this course. It's okay to fall behind. There's always another boot camp afterwards that you can cycle around to if you need to. But stick with it. Try your best. Give it a good, honest try, and we'd love to see you back next week. Thanks for coming by, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good day.